July 4th, 2025. Mexico City, the beating heart of North America's largest metropolis, erupted into chaos. What started as a peaceful protest against mass tourism and skyrocketing rents turned into a night of smashed windows, burning effigies, and cries of "Gringo, go home." Businesses were looted, tourists were harassed, and the streets of trendy neighborhoods like Condesa and Roma became battlegrounds. But was this just a spontaneous outburst, or a symptom of something much deeper? A city pushed to its breaking point by gentrification, inequality, and cultural clashes. Welcome to America's Biggest Crimes, where we dive deep into the crimes and conflicts shaping our world. Today, we're unraveling the story of Mexico City's violent protests, why they happened, who was behind them, and what they mean for a nation grappling with its identity. Buckle up, because this is a story of rage, resentment, and rebellion. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you don't miss our weekly deep dives into the world's darkest stories. Let's get started. To understand why Mexico City exploded, we need to go back to the root of the rage: gentrification. Since the early 2000s, Mexico City has transformed into a global hotspot. In 2016, the New York Times called it the New Berlin, praising its vibrant nightlife, art scene, and affordability. But for locals, this transformation came at a cost. A 2024 study revealed housing prices in Mexico City quadrupled from 2000 to 2022, with some gentrified areas like Condesa and Roma seeing eightfold increases. Meanwhile, local incomes stagnated or declined. The influx of foreigners, especially Americans and Europeans, fueled this crisis. During the COVID-19 pandemic, Mexico's lax restrictions made it a haven for remote workers, or digital nomads, who flocked to the city with dollars and euros, driving up rents and displacing long-time residents. Neighborhoods like Condesa and Roma, once known for their local charm, became enclaves where English was heard more than Spanish in some cafes. Tortillerias and corner stores gave way to wine bars and boutique gyms. For many Mexicans, it felt like their city was being colonized, not by force, but by money. Daniela Grave, a protester, summed it up: "The playing field is not level." Locals earning pesos couldn't compete with foreigners paying in dollars, who often didn't pay local taxes. Tensions simmered, and by 2025, they were ready to boil over. On July 4, 2025, ironically U.S. Independence Day, hundreds of protesters, mostly young locals and former residents of gentrified neighborhoods, took to the streets. Their message was clear: stop the flood of tourists and remote workers driving up costs and erasing local culture. The march began peacefully, passing the U.S. Embassy, with signs demanding curbs on short-term rentals like Airbnb and taxes on foreign residents. The protesters weren't just angry ascot. They were organized, fueled by groups like Mexicans in Defense of the Nation, who had been posting xenophobic flyers around the city, blaming foreigners for gentrification. But as the night wore on, a smaller group of demonstrators turned the protest violent. By nightfall, chaos erupted. 15 businesses, banks, a Starbucks, a taco chain, had their windows smashed. Videos showed protesters harassing diners at upscale taquerias, demanding they leave, with some patrons flashing Mexican IDs to prove they weren't foreigners. Cars were vandalized, and an effigy of Donald Trump was burned in Parque Mexico. The damage was estimated in the millions of pesos. Cesar Cravioto, Mexico City's government secretary, reported that 15 businesses were affected and called the protests xenophobic, urging dialogue over violence. President Claudia Sheinbaum echoed this, condemning the vandalism while acknowledging the legitimate concerns about gentrification. For a crime channel like ours, the question is, how do we classify what happened? The acts of vandalism, smashing windows, looting businesses, and defacing property, qualify as property crimes under Mexican law. harassment of tourists and locals mistaken for foreigners could fall under assault or public disturbance statutes. But was this a spontaneous outburst of frustration, or something more organized? Some reports suggest groups like Mexicans in Defense of the Nation may have orchestrated parts of the protest, pushing a nationalist agenda. Their flyers, posted earlier in 2025, demanded foreigners respect the locals or leave. But no evidence points to a centralized plot to target American properties specifically. Instead, the violence seemed opportunistic, with businesses in tourist-heavy areas bearing the brunt. The crime wasn't just property damage. The harassment of diners, some of whom were Mexican citizens, raises questions about mob mentality and misdirected anger. One viral incident involved American influencer Ariel Simone, who faced threats after posting about her move to Mexico City. Her GoFundMe to relocate sparked outrage, seen as tone-deaf amid local struggles. This wasn't cartel-level violence, but it tapped into a similar undercurrent of resentment against perceived outsiders. The burning of Trump's effigy tied the protests to broader U.S.-Mexico tensions, especially with President Trump's threats of tariffs and immigration crackdowns fueling nationalist sentiment. So, why did this happen? At its core, this was about displacement. Locals saw their neighborhoods change, their rents triple, and their culture sidelined. The protesters' signs, "Gentrification is colonization," framed foreigners as invaders, echoing historical grievances about foreign influence in Mexico. But the xenophobic tone, like "speak Spanish or die," alarmed officials and divided public opinion. President Claudia Sheinbaum walked a tightrope, condemning the violence and xenophobic displays while validating the fight against gentrification. She's pushed for affordable housing and hinted at regulating platforms like Airbnb, which she once promoted as Mexico City's mayor. But her critics argue she's partly to blame, having courted tourism in 2022. Mexico City's tourism boom, over 1 million visitors in Q1 2025 alone, made it a victim of its own success. The city's appeal, cheap for foreigners but costly for locals, created a powder keg. Add in U.S. Mexico tensions, like Trump's tariff threats and immigration rhetoric, and you get a perfect storm for unrest. This wasn't just a crime story. It was a cultural and economic one. The protests exposed a city at a crossroads, a global hub or a home for its people. The violence, while condemned, forced a conversation about inequality that's long overdue. To put this in perspective, Mexico City's protests are a drop in the bucket compared to the country's broader crime crisis. Mexico sees around 30,000 homicides a year, one of the highest rates globally, driven largely by cartel violence. In Sinaloa, a bloody cartel war has left nearly 3,000 dead or missing since September 2024, after the arrest of Sinaloa cartel leader El Mayo Zambada. Unlike cartel-driven violence, the Mexico City protests weren't about drugs or territory, but about identity and survival. Yet, the same impunity, 93% of crimes go unpunished in Mexico, fuels distrust in institutions, whether it's cartel killings or property crimes. The protests tapped into that frustration, showing how economic inequality can spark chaos as much as organized crime. The difference? Cartel violence is often rural or targeted. These protests hit the capital's heart, threatening its image as a safe tourist haven. If gentrification continues unchecked, could this be a preview of more unrest? Drone shot of Mexico City at night, fading to black. The July 4th protests left Mexico City with broken windows and a bruised reputation, but they also sparked a debate. Can the city balance its global appeal with the needs of its residents? Will leaders like Sheinbaum deliver on promises of affordable housing, or will resentment fester, leading to more violence? For now, the streets are calm, but the anger remains. This is America's biggest crimes, where we uncover the stories behind the crimes. What do you think? Were the protesters criminals, or desperate locals pushed too far? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and let us know what crime story you want us to cover next. If you found this deep dive gripping, smash that like button, subscribe, and share this video with your true crime crew.